Her and her husband were taking a drive one Sunday afternoon looking for jig mold. And they see these two molds. They bought both of them, okay? And it happened to be those two misformed molds. That's the only two, evidently, that were ever made, and they were mismade.
We have two special guests with us on this episode, one of whom you guys have actually heard from before, and that is JD Dudley of D2 Jigs.
Right.
And JD, you were episode 4.
4.
And we're coming up on episode 100 here pretty soon. So you were early on in the journey.
I feel very blessed to be able to sit here with you guys right now.
Yeah, man. Welcome back. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
And our other guest is Jerry Dudley, JD's dad.
Good to be here.
Yes, absolutely. You grew up here in Arkansas. You've been here for a long time.
Yep.
And you were a center point for a lot of the story of how D2 Jig started, and have been fishing the Marabou Jig for a long time. For you, when did you first start getting into fishing, and what did kind of growing up in Arkansas look like for you?
So, born in Fort Smith, Arkansas, moved to Fayetteville when I was about 5, and other than a little stretch in the military, driving an over-the-road truck, I've been here all my life. Met my lovely bride, and we got married in 1965.
Okay.
She didn't know what fish was, and I tried to teach her, but she didn't learn very good. And I hope she gets to see this thing. So
She can catfish.
Oh, definitely she can do that.
She can catch catfish.
Yeah. So my granddad was my mentor in the fishing. He had the equipment. I had none. My mom and dad had a few problems in life, so my sister and my mother and I lived with my grandparents for a number of years. And so anytime the car left to go to the old White River before any of these lakes were around here, I had to be in that car. But the day before, we'd go out and seine minnows out of these ponds and out of creeks, and I'd dig the worms. We'd do all of that. So that's how the fishing kind of began in my life.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, so then move on ahead a little bit of that, and my granddad would not use fake bait, if you will.
Okay.
He just wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
If he used a jig, it had to have a minnow stuck through the tail. And so it makes some motion.
Yeah.
And that man caught more crappie than you could ever imagine doing that.
Man, I just feel like the old timers, they knew what they were doing. They were just out on the water so much. They just knew a little bit of wiggle was all you needed.
That's it. But that jig had to move, and that's how it moved, was you stick that minnow on there and make it move.
Okay.
So then went in the military, stayed there for a while, got married. That took care of a lot of things, a lot of my play fun and all that stuff. But then my granddad, as he grew older, he got to where he couldn't go out and fish, by himself. So I'd take him. And we'd usually go to the Arkansas River, take whatever kind of catfish bait we had, and we'd fish there. And somewhere in the back of my head, I kept seeing those minnows on those jigs. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the first time I ever really fished with a jig, a friend of mine, the white bass were running up the White River. Now, these were native white bass. The lake wasn't there yet. Okay.
Okay. Which lake?
Beaver.
Beaver was.
So evidently there's some white bass either stocked or in these lakes before the dam was built and all that stuff.
What year might have this have been?
Let's see. No, it had to be after that. The dam was built in 68, 72?
63, I think it was.
63,
Yeah,
okay.
Beaver, I think, was 63.
Yeah, it was shortly thereafter.
Okay.
So anyway, the white bass were there.
Yeah.
And he says, let's just use these jigs. And I said, what else you got? And he said, that's all I got. So I take one of these jigs.
Sticking with the jigs then.
It's a hair jig, and it's got a red head on it. And he said, now take your knife and scrape all that paint off of it. And I did. And we just wore those white bass out. Change heads or anything, wouldn't bite them. And so I kind of fell in love with the jigs then, but then it kind of departed for a while.
And that was with your grandpa?
Yeah, no, this was just a good friend.
Okay.
Now, after that, I'd still fish with my granddad, and I'd say, hey, Grandpa, how about using one of these jigs here? Okay, let me have it. He'd scrape the head off and everything, stick that freaking minnow on there. He had to have that minnow on there. So then finally, in our later years, JD was probably late junior high, maybe high school. We were going to church at University Baptist Church, and there's a friend named Jim Hall, and Jim was a trout fisherman.
Yeah, and we've actually talked with Pam and Jim on. We've
Mhm.
had them on the podcast
Right.
and hung out with them, and great people.
Absolutely.
And their
Yeah.
story's cool, and what Pam's doing with
Yep.
the outreach and the missions that she does.
You bet.
Right.
You bet. So anyway, I see Jim at Sunday school, and I said, "Hey, Jim, JD and I have been fishing some up at Roaring River." I said, "We caught quite a few trout fish yesterday. I understand you like trout fish. You want us to stake you." He said, "Well, how many did you catch?" I said, "We caught probably 30 or so on a day." And I said, "That's pretty good." He said, "How big were they?" I said, "About," he says, I told him about a pound to a pound and a half. Okay. So then he says, "How about I take you to my place?" And I think, well, I'm telling him about this great day and he don't even want to go there. So I said, "Okay, let's work it out."
Hold on.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks, he said we needed a couple of ultralights with 2 pound maxima is what we used then. Since then, we changed to SOS because it's much stronger, but we used the 2 pound maxima. And we went to Gene's Trout Dock. He taught us right quick how to do it. And
This is on Norfolk.
this is on Norfolk.
Okay.
Okay. And we decided that we were going to count these fish. So we start, and before we get down to this 200 yards down the river, we'd caught 30. Okay. And that just was the beginning of the day. And Jim taught us that day how to yo-yo these jigs and how to catch fish, how to catch trout on these. And it was a day to remember. 150, 200 fish. We quit counting after a while and just estimated what we'd caught.
Yeah.
So that was our first day of actual trout fishing
Okay.
in the waters of the tailwaters of the White River.
That was the summer of '83.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's what it was.
And that was the first time you were like you'd fished with jigs before, but specifically fishing for trout.
Yep.
And were these Marabou jigs at the time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And Marabou, and correct me if I'm wrong, Marabou is like a feather used from a turkey, right? It's like the soft down off of a domesticated turkey.
It comes off the back leg of a turkey.
Okay.
I mean, back leg, the back of the leg of the turkey.
Okay. Gotcha.
They only got 2 legs.
They do. They don't have back leg.
They ain't got a back leg. Yeah.
Gotcha. So in that Marabou, it and we've talked with, like I said, Pam and Jim, it undulates in the water and it gives that a little bit of extra wiggle that floats and just drives those trout
extremely
crazy.
natural.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it just flows. Every little current of the water picks up that marabou and it just flows
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
Very natural.
And so at this time, I want to kind of talk a little bit about history of the jig and even before, the jigs that you guys started putting together and making. Talk me as far back as you can remember Marabou jigs and their use in the Ozarks.
Okay.
What do you remember as far as the first time that those kind of came on the scene?
Okay. So as far as I can remember, I was sitting in front of a black and white TV at my grandfather's house and, just watching whatever came on. And there was a show came on called Virgil Ward, and I can't remember the name of his show. But I had to be about 12 years old, and I was born in 42, so that'd be 54.
Okay.
53, 54, slung in there. Black and white TV is all we had. But he did these shows, and they would be like up in the upper reaches of Canada and Alaska, Great Bear Lake, and all those places. I remember he fished there a lot.
Yeah.
Caught big muskies and all that stuff.
He
And
was
so
kind of like the TV personality back in the day.
It's like old outdoor TV
he
show.
was he was like the one.
Okay.
I don't remember any others
Really?
being on that TV. And there was a TV station at Springfield that did it because he was a Branson or Springfield, somewhere where he was from.
So you're saying the first TV outdoor personality came out of the Ozarks?
That's what to my knowledge.
Yeah.
And I've been around a long
We're
time.
going to have to look this guy
Say
up.
that's
Virgil
new
Ward.
information to me.
That's
Yeah.
pretty cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now you had a story about his grandson, right?
Yeah, his Virgil Ward's grandson got a hold of me. Oh, I don't know, probably 2 years ago, and he sent me an email and introduced himself. Said that he was Virgil Ward's grandson, and he had remembered using the jigs, and somehow he had heard of D2 jigs, whether it was through the website or YouTube, whatever, and got a hold of me and asked if he could order some. He was taking his son down to the White, and of course, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm going to do that for anybody, but Virgil Ward's son, and I watched Virgil Ward as a kid as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so very honored to be able to do that.
That's so cool.
Yeah, they sent me pictures of. I mean, he's continued to order since then, and they still fish down there. And the pictures of the fish, it's in their blood.
Yeah.
Because the fish that these people are catching, he and his son that they're catching are, I mean, they're White River trophies.
Yeah.
They are, 24, 25, 26-inch rainbows and browns that are the same size, a little bit bigger. So again, I mean, just very, very honored to be able to have a connection there with Virgil Ward. It's pretty neat.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
So Virgil's the first guy you remember
Yeah.
seeing do that.
That's it.
Okay.
And I don't remember if he fished them like we do now or just reeled them in, how they did it or anything about it. But I remember the name Virgil Ward. And I remember some of the old trout docks and the way he fished those docks. JD and I still fish those docks that way today.
Really?
And it's some of the original docks on Taneycomo Lake.
Man.
Yeah. So that's
And
cool.
he was up on Taneycomo. Is that what you think where he was fishing
Yeah,
at?
that's where he was making his shows at. Trout shows was on Taneycomo. The other ones were actually up in Canada and Alaska.
But
Right.
that was before Bull Shoals,
Oh,
Table
yeah.
Rock, Beaver,
Yeah.
Taneycomo was the only.
Before the lakes were built.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the original Power Sight Dam,
Gotcha.
the one at Taneycomo there by
Mhm.
Branson, the little
Yeah.
lake.
Yeah.
That was the original one. None of the rest of them were there then.
Yeah. Man, that is cool.
Yep.
That goes a ways back.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking well over. I don't know. I'm not going to do quick math on here. I'll be embarrassed, but that's a long time ago, right?
yeah,
a couple
long
decades.
time ago,
Help me
Yeah.
out, Jed. You're doing the math.
70 years.
There you go.
70 years
Is
ago.
that right?
70 years ago. 69 years ago. So I'm 81 now.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Man,
And I hadn't been fishing since last week. So something's got to give here. I got to get back to my fishing. This weather's got to change.
you're gonna have to.
Yeah.
So that was the first time you remember
Yeah.
seeing that happen,
Yeah.
and then from there, you mentioned fishing with Jim Hall that one day.
hmm
But was anybody else fishing jigs, Marabou jigs on the White River at this point in time, or, I mean, how widely known was it that jigs were like a lethal tool if you're going to go catch some trout?
Yeah. Okay. So as far as I can remember listening to the stories that I've heard, the jig fishing for trout actually started in Missouri, which would have been Mr. Ward.
Okay.
Okay.
Up on
And then
Taneycomo.
some of the guides picked it up. Some of the old boys at Campbell Guide Service and those guys, I'm sure they used them for smallmouth and whatnot. But so the trout fishing for jigs, though, actually migrated from lower Missouri, Montauk, Bennett Springs, those places, migrated south into North Arkansas.
as
to
the
the trout.
as the lakes were built.
Yes, as the lakes were built.
Okay.
So they migrated into North Arkansas, which leads me to a lady named Ellen Klosterman.
Mm-hmm.
Ellen Klosterman was from Hardy, Arkansas.
Okay.
And I've heard several stories about how these jigs all started and everything. Ellen Klosterman was the beginning of the jigs in North Arkansas.
Really?
The Marabou jigs. I'm sure people were using hair jigs and whatnot and other
And
kinds
crappie
of
jigs. And
crappie jigs and all of that stuff, anything they could find. But as far as a trout jig goes, Ellen Klosterman actually started that. Ellen and I, before she passed, we became good friends, and I'd call her up and we just have long chit chats about the good old days and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Now, these
of her tying jigs.
These were the same jigs that Jim Hall was using.
Yes.
The first time that we went, because
Yeah.
Jim
Okay.
had been ordering them from Ellen.
Gotcha.
I guess he had seen them at Lindsay's dock on
Yep. On Little
on
Red.
Little Red.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Ellen had been selling them to
Yeah,
Lindsay's.
to I think that's right.
Yeah.
You may have to check with Jim on that, but I know they kind of originated or they were used there a lot,
Okay.
and Jim was using them. That's where when Dad and I went in '83, Jim introduced us to the jigs, and then after that, I mean, he started ordering from Ellen,
Yeah.
and I mean the rest is history.
So who is Ellen, and why? How did she come into making these jigs? I mean, was she just a big fisherwoman, angler,
Yeah.
just herself, or how did she come into contact?
First of all, Hardy, Arkansas is where she was from,
Okay.
and that's by Spring Creek, and the Kroger hatchery was at Spring Creek. And eventually, I think the state of Arkansas took that. It's one of the old silo hatcheries, like Roaring River.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it wasn't the long runs. It was a shallow hatchery, and so she would sell jigs. She was making some hair jigs, selling them to these guys. Okay, and they were trout fishing with them, and then eventually they went into Little Red River. I think Little Red River is probably where Jim started using them, buying them from Lindsay's or Little Red Dock or wherever down there. And then so this kind of migrated around, but she was the chief supplier of all of the jigs in this area at that time,
Okay.
of the Marabou hair jigs. that were worth anything for trout fishing.
Yeah.
Now, here's how this all started, okay? Her and her husband were taking a drive one Sunday afternoon, and they went up into Missouri, and they found at West Plains, Missouri, they found an old hardware store, wood floors, you know, the old creaky floors and all that, and it had the little thing up around the top where they put coaster wagons and all that stuff, and you could walk up there. So they're walking around, and they had been actually looking for a trout or a jig mold that would make a better mold than what they were using. I think they may have been just using ball heads at that time. I don't know.
Were they already selling lures?
They were doing
for
some,
work?
They were doing some trout jigs and then some bass jigs, hair
Okay.
jigs and whatnot. But the trout jigs, they were already putting the marabou on them at that time. So then they're walking around and they see these two jigs, and they're
the molds.
yeah, molds. Do it molds out of Waterloo, Iowa. They see these two, and they look at them, and it's 1/8 down to 1/32, and you're going to have to pour them individually. It's just like those little blue handle molds that got now. Okay, so her husband says, Ellen, do you think this might be something that we could use to pour those heads a little better? And so they bought both of them, okay? And it happened to be those two misformed molds. And I've done my history on that and went back through the Do It Mold Company, talking to different representatives and everything. They have never seen another mold like those two.
Really?
No, that's the only two evidently that were ever made, and they were mismade. And you know the
So
story
somehow
is
they
like
wound
this.
up in a construction store,
in,
or hardware store.
in a hardware store in West Plains, Missouri.
Oh, my goodness.
So they buy them, they take them home. Okay, now she's using that for her jig molds, and she's pouring those leads one at a time. She's sanding them off one at a time. She bought her paint from a Napa auto parts store, and here's the deal. Okay, she put hardener in it. Eventually she told me how to do all this. So she puts the hardener on it. Well, that's going to keep the paint on there well until you consider it's lead, and you ain't going to keep lead so soft you ain't going to keep nothing on it very long.
Right.
So it came off of that too. But so anyway, let's see. She did all of that process and everything, and then she starts pouring more and tying more and tying more, and she put them on card, a dozen at a piece. And it's a little white card about 2 inches wide. In fact, out in JD's garage, he's got the first dozen I ever tied.
Yeah.
Really?
Hanging out there on that wall.
Oh, that's cool.
And they were 16th ounce black marabou. Okay. So then it just rolled on, and then Ellen got to where she had, arthritis real bad in her hands, and she was getting to where she couldn't tie. And so I was talking to her on the phone one day. I said, Ellen, do you think you could make me some 1/4 ounce that I could use for bass heads? And she said, Jerry, I really don't have the right hooks to do that. All I've got's thin wire hooks. If you're going to bass fish, you got to have something bigger.
Yeah.
And we talked about it a little bit. And she says, you know what? She said, there's one of these molds that just about wore out. She said, I'm going to send that to you. And she gave me one of those molds. Okay, so when I get the mold, then what I start doing is I pour a few, and then I would.
Did you know how to do this? Like, I'm thinking if someone gives me a mold, I'm like, I got no
That's
idea
it.
what to
I
do
have
with
no
this.
idea in the world.
Right.
So we got one of those little lead pots that you build a fire under.
Okay.
Okay, and then you get them hot, and then you try to keep them the temperature right, and half the time that you'd ruin them, you know. So, but JD was helping me some at that time, even though he was in high school, he was helping me some, you know. And we'd tried to perfect that mold. I mean, the head where we got it pretty well tweaked, you know. And then I would take one of her jigs and a razor blade, and I would start up on the tie, okay, on the thread, and I'd start cutting those. And what I was trying to do was figure out how many times she wrapped that and how strong she wrapped it, because we didn't want those feathers coming off of there.
Okay.
And our
See.
feathers to this day
Right.
don't come off those jigs.
Yeah.
I mean, if one does, I'm sure you're guaranteed to get another one like it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we would do that, and then what I would do is I'd tie up 6 of this, 7 of that, 8 of the other, and I'd go up to Roaring River, and I'd take 2-pound line maxima and 4-pound maxima. I'd go, you know, Roaring River, anybody can catch a limit of trout in 5 minutes when they blow that whistle in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
After that, you're gonna figure out who can trout fish and who can't. I waited till 3 o'clock in bluebird skies and go down on the lower end and sat down there on a bank, and I just kept changing those jigs. I figured if I could catch fish there, I could catch them anywhere in the world on those jigs.
So you intentionally went after the morning rush had gone. These
You
fish,
bet.
they were highly pressured, and you're like, if I can still catch fish, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I could. I'd change a jig, I'd change the color, I'd change the presentation, but I'd always go back to that yo-yo, just like JD shows you how to do in these videos.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so we go back to that, and that's how we ended up tying these jigs. Back in those days, you could sell them for $3 a dozen. You couldn't get no more money out of them than that.
Really?
Yeah. If I had two feathers, two different colored feathers on them, I could get 2 1/4. And if I put 3 on it, I got 3 1/2. Okay, 2 1/2 a jig now.
Yeah.
And that's been going on for a long. Before JD came around, that's been going on a long time.
Yeah, some inflation there.
Yeah.
A
So
little bit, yeah.
It all started with a factory defect mold,
That's it.
and that changes the action on it.
That's it. Changes the action.
It's got the mold is it's not flat. It's a little bit tapered, and then on the other side it's rounded,
Okay.
and it creates that wounded. I mean, it's a spiral.
Yeah.
And you have to look at it. The top and bottom of that mold,
Yeah.
but you got to really be looking at what you're seeing, or you can't even tell it's offset.
Gotcha.
You know, I tried to get some done. There's an engineer friend of mine at Fayetteville that he made me a mold. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
didn't even get close to it.
Really?
Nope. And he had a computer and one of those jigs, and he still couldn't get close to it. It's just a touch, just enough.
Yep.
To make him go down.
So I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about a defect that was made in a factory in Waterloo,
It's Waterloo, Iowa.
Iowa.
Mhm.
Essentially has changed the course of history on the White River in Arkansas and Missouri
That's right. Yeah.
in the way that people fish, because these jigs now, I mean, this is the original White River jig, are utilized widely. I mean, thousands and thousands of people use these. And and if you're in any fly shop or a lot of fly shops, you're going to see some variation of a Marabou jig. And,
Right.
and a lot of them have originated with this, with Ellen Klosterman. Is that right?
Yep. Ellen Klosterman.
What are the odds of that happening?
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I love to hear these guys tell stories of how the jig started. I got the story, brother.
Yeah.
That is the truth
Man.
of how this all, and you can check it out with Jim and some of these other guys.
Yeah.
And if they'll come clean, they'll tell you where they started at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Jim will.
Yeah.
I mean,
Jim has echoed it. For
yeah,
sure.
Jim echoed it. Yeah. Jim knows Ellen well, or knew her
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at what point did she kind of pass the torch on to you? And, you know, these, I guess, eventually she can't tie anymore, right? And she's giving you the mold.
Yeah.
Does she give you the other mold too eventually, or what? How does the story go from there?
So Ellen eventually got to where she couldn't tie it all, and I was talking to her, and I said, Ellen, I've tied a few of these jigs. Just to be honest with you, I've tied a few of them, and JD and I use them, you know, and some of our friends use them, and whatnot. I said, there's going to come a time when you can't tie, and I'm just wondering if I could accept that mantle from you to tie these jigs. And she said, absolutely, you can have it. You can pass the mantle to me.
Yeah.
I said, other jigs? She said, nope, that's going to my family.
Okay.
Now, I've talked to her son and tried to buy that mold, and he won't put a price on it.
He won't.
I just told
Not
him,
for
I said,
sale.
name your price.
Yeah.
Just tell me what you want for it. I may have to borrow the money to buy it, but
Yeah.
I would love to have that. And he says, if and when I die, if you're still alive, you can have that mold.
Man.
But evidently he's still alive because I ain't never seen it yet. Yeah.
So for them, that's a priceless family heirloom that
Oh, yeah.
I'm sure they hold in super high regard, as
You
would
bet.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the mold the mold that Ellen sent him is in my garage.
Yeah.
So,
And,
okay.
and he actually had, when I called him and asked him in the summer of 18 if I could tie some jigs, because I was taking my son fishing.
Right.
I said, do you care if I, tie some jigs up here? Can I bring the mold up here? He said, I'm gonna have to think about it for a minute,
Yeah.
because he had the attachment to it as well.
Sure.
In knowing the history with it. But sure enough, I mean, he thought about it, prayed about it, and he wasn't tying anymore. He stopped tying in 05 or 06, somewhere around there. And the next
Allergies
week, yeah.
to those feathers.
So that's right. So that's part of the story.
Mhm.
Go ahead. We can go ahead and I know we've talked about it, JD, before on another
Right.
thing that we did together, but go through it. I mean, so you had it, the torch has been passed to you.
Yeah.
You're tying them. Eventually you have to stop.
Yeah, I have to stop. So here's the deal. JD called me that day and said, can I bring the mold up here? And I thought about it, for about 1 second. And I said, nope, the mold ain't never left my garage or part of this house. You ain't getting it.
Yeah.
And I was adamant about that.
Yeah.
So I hung up and I said, come on down here. You're more than welcome to use it here at the house.
yeah.
So I thought about it for a little bit. And like I said, prayed about it a little bit. And here's my thought, okay, that mold is laying down here in this garage that has caused so many men such great pleasure catching fish with the jigs that come out of that mold and that other one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I said, and JD can tie much better than I can because his fingers are stronger and his more precision. And I thought about that, and I've got good night. I don't know how many bags of feathers and lead and all this other stuff just laying down there.
Mm-hmm.
So I called JD back and I said, "You at home?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "I'll be up there in a minute." And so I
didn't know what was coming.
he didn't know
You
what
didn't
was
know.
coming, and I had boxed up hundreds of bags of feathers, thousands of hooks,
Yeah.
and pounds and pounds and pounds of lead, and the mold.
Yeah. Old paint cans.
Old paint cans.
Brought it all.
Yeah, the some of them they put sparkles. Gosh, what do you call that?
The flake.
Yeah, metal flake and polyflake paint
Right.
on some of those heads, and I had cans and that was all that stuff was bought at Ranger. So it was the Ranger flake.
Ranger boat
Yeah,
paint
Ranger
on
boat
the jigs.
No, not the paint, just the
Metal flake.
I
the
was
flake.
still
Yeah,
I
the
was
flake.
still using paint from Napa Auto Store.
Really? So
Yeah.
you got
I just-
auto store
I
paint
just-
and a boat company flake
That's it, and a boat company
on
flake.
a defective mold jig.
Yeah, and
This
two,
is a
and
Back
two,
of turkey leg feather
And-
catching all the trout.
and two flakes tying them.
That's amazing.
Two
And
flakes
two,
tying
and two
them.
flakes
Yeah,
tying
two
them.
flakes,
Make sure you're using the back legs of the turkey.
Gotta get the back legs.
Right.
Yeah.
So you drove it up to his house,
Yeah.
drop it off in the garage.
Drove it up to his house and gave it to him. And I do some ministry in the homeless communities around Northwest Arkansas, and I've learned many times over that if I go to help a person that's homeless or less fortunate, if I very seldom give any of them money, okay, but I'll bring them something to eat, take them to buy gas in their car or whatever. But if I happen to give them some cash or something, I'll hand it to them and never look back, okay? Because I don't want to see what they do with that. If they do good with it, fine. It's up to God what they do with it. But here's the deal, okay? I drove out of this driveway and I ain't looked back, except at all the miraculous things he's doing with his jigs. And I think a lot of that, and he'll agree with this, is he has the expertise of how to use a computer. I still type with two fingers. I'd never make any of that stuff work that he does.
Yeah.
So
You're making me sound like a tech whiz, and I am not.
He's used the words computer genius and precision with you, JD. Is that how you would describe yourself?
Yeah, I'm a lot like Microsoft and who is it, Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And we're pretty tight.
Yeah, I can see that.
pretty tight.
I
Yeah.
can see that.
Yeah.
So the mantle was passed again
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
in 2005, you said?
2018
Oh,
was when that was,
2018.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Between 05 and 18, I think I shared this last time, but just a quick recap is when he stopped tying, we still continued to fish,
Mm-hmm.
but like everybody else, we were using PJ's jigs because we still had that relationship with Jim and Pam, and didn't skip a beat with them. But I remembered the mold. I knew I knew the story. And I knew how good they were.
Right.
I knew that, and Jim, don't misinterpret what I'm saying. PJ's jigs are great jigs, and they catch fish just like these do. But I also remember the little bit of a spiral that took place on these jigs. So I wanted to tie jigs that from the company that he had started, and so brought it up here and started tying.
Yeah.
So it's been neat.
So that was 2018.
Yeah,
So-
summer
so-
of 18.
So you pick it up, and where does it go from there? I assume you start with, like anyone would, friends and family, right?
Yeah, I sat down. I started tying for Drew and I, and for Dad too. And word slowly got out that Jerry's Jigs were being tied again. That was the
Okay.
name of his company.
Okay.
It was
And-
Jerry's Jig and Guide.
And you had developed a reputation, right? Like people knew about the jigs.
Yeah.
Okay.
He failed to mention this, and he wouldn't because he's a pretty humble guy. But he was featured in the '90s in like Field and Stream, and was
Ozark
in
Trout
Ozark
Tales.
Trout Tales with Steve
That's
Wright.
right, Steve Wright's book.
the White River Bible, quote
Yeah.
unquote.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of folks knew him. But I picked it up. I picked it up that summer, and word slowly got back out that Jerry's Jigs were being tied again. And so he would call me and say, "Hey, I got a couple of buds that want to order some of your jigs, and can you tie some for them?" Well, sure, why not? And uh, slowly, those orders started coming in more and more. And in January of the following year, in 19, I got my LLC because I wanted to do it right.
Right.
I could have, I could have kept it under the radar, but I don't want to do that.
Sure.
So I got my LLC, and really, long story short, put a website together with a friend. Actually, he did it because I could lay claim to it because I am a tech whiz, but not a chance. He put it together for me. Matt Potts did.
Okay.
And the website sat dormant for July. We launched it in July of 19. Sat dormant in July and August, and then September something happened. And I got orders. It was 20-something orders, totaled like $700 or something.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, it's just grown. And the long summary of the short summary of the last 5 years is partnered with Trout Magnet. Again, seeing God's hand in all of this has been amazing.
Yeah.
Because he'll put the step out in front of me, and then I'll take the step. But if I try to take the step in front of him, I'm not getting to take it.
Yeah.
I mean, it'll end up faltering. Well, the story with Jeff Smith was one of those where God brought us together.
And Jeff
he's the owner of Trout Magnet.
okay.
And the way that we connected could be a totally different episode in our history. It's really neat. But the short of it is that I was looking for some line. I wanted to sell the SOS line on my website, and ended up calling him to see if he minded, and we connected there. And I went down the next week and talked, and we decided that we were going to try to do this together. And we sat for 2 years. I talked with his manufacturers on conference calls and video calls, and showing them how to tie them and get the quality right. They'd send me samples, and I'd pull on them. Yeah, they're good. They're not good enough yet. And I guess it was the summer. We're in 24 now, so the summer of 22. In July, they sent me samples, and they were dead on.
Okay.
I pulled and pulled and pulled, and I was breaking feathers before I was pulling them out.
So at that point, the quality matched what you were tying by hand.
Yeah. And so they introduced me to iCast in July of 22, and I just thought that it was growing.
Mm-hmm.
But once it hit iCast, I mean, just boom, it's gone crazy. I'm at a threshold myself. I have orders coming into the website. And I'm going to have to do something at some point, pretty quick, to get some help. But Jeff's selling them as well. Trout Magnet is, and it's really, really neat because like Virgil Ward's grandson, getting to connect with people like that, but you also get people from Utah who call and they want to talk about. Do you think the jigs will work out here? And we get to talk. I'm getting to talk about fishing with people all over the country and sometimes across the world. Just very, very blessed to be able to do it. I mean, it's not something that I was intending to do at all.
Yeah.
I love fishing, and I mean that's what God does. Is it's exceedingly abundantly more than I could ever ask or imagine. It's been really, really neat.
Yeah.
So, and I still talk with this guy almost on a daily basis. Pick his brain about, hey, I'm looking at this new color, and I'll send it to him. Oh yeah, that'll work. Or no, you don't want to try that. I've already done it. Or just a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
The only problem he and I have now is he told me when he started all this, Dad, if you need any jigs, just call me. So I called him, and he said, well, I got this order, and this order. So I'm buying mine at Bass Pro like everybody else. although for Christmas, he did tie me about 3 dozen.
Did he get you? Okay.
Yeah, he got me a few.
Finally took care of Dad.
Yeah, I did. I told him, and I really do try to stick with it. That anytime he needs jigs, he's never going to buy a jig from me ever.
No.
Because I could tie for the next 10 years and give him all the jigs with it. And I'm still not repaying everything that he's done for me as far as my love for fishing goes.
Thank
and things like that. So, it's truly a family deal from him to me. And, my son, he loves fishing. He's really into bass fishing.
Okay.
But we're also in the process of potentially developing a bass jig. And
Okay.
he's helping with that. So, to see where God may take it next with him being involved, it's truly a family deal. My wife and my daughter, my daughter will paint some of the heads. My wife has learned, she started tying last summer, and she's actually better at it than I am. She's not as fast.
Of course,
at
she
it
is.
Yeah, I mean, she would be
As you'd expect.
Yeah, absolutely. But she's been extremely helpful. My daughter has. It really is a neat deal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is awesome. I want to get people set up on these because now we've talked it up, right? Like the jig works, and I want people to be able to have the chance to actually go out and fish these. So, one, tell me, where can people buy these jigs? And you've mentioned you're selling through Trout Magnets, so that really you can get them just about anywhere, right?
Right,
But
right.
but where would someone find these?
So for now, we're in or Trout Magnet. It's called the Trout Magnet D2 jig.
Okay.
Is found in Bass Pro shops that are located near trout waters.
Okay.
So right now, well, we started in 3 stores. It was in Rogers because of Beaver Tail Waters, in Branson because you got Taneycomo, and then of course Springfield kind of covers all of it.
Right.
We've now or we've since gotten into other Bass Pros. I'm not real sure which ones they are. It may be 15, 20 Bass Pros, whether it's regionally, maybe in the east around Tennessee. I would guess out there. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
I just found out that we are that we're in Academy. Academy's picked some up in the store locations. Again, I'm not real sure because I think they're just starting to sell them in January or this month. So I'm not real sure there yet. Jeff knows all that. But also on the website d2jigs.com. That's my website. I have all of the colors. Trout Magnet has 12 of the colors. I have those 12 colors and then all the rest of the colors as well. And so you can go to the website and order there.
Okay.
And they've got Trout Magnet is selling 1/16, or now they're selling 1/32, 1/16, and 1/8. But then I've got 1/16, 3/32, and 1/8 as well.
Okay. Gotcha. So there's a lot of options. People can get them in a lot of different places.
Well, and it's also some local retailers like Hook, Line, and Sinker.
Okay.
Is carrying them, both mine and the Trout Magnet D2 jigs.
Gotcha.
So they've got all the colors, and then there are several stores over around Mountain Home that are carrying them. Again, I'm not real sure. I could probably look at the list and tell you, but I'm not real sure.
You lose track after a little while.
Yeah, which is so bizarre.
That's crazy, man.
It really is.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So once you get them, right, I want to talk now, like how can people get out on the water and be successful fishing? You guys have mentioned, I know you guys love like the ultralight game,
right,
and throwing these things out there and catching, I don't know, 10-pound fish on 2-pound line.
Right.
And I know you've even gone up to Alaska and caught a lot bigger fish on like 2-pound line.
Right.
What is the setup that you guys kind of do? So you've got these jigs now. What are you buying size wise, and maybe walk me through the variations of when you would use one over the other?
Yeah. You want to take that?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I defer to him because he's the wealth of knowledge with this. Again, I learned it all from him, but I can tell
Not
you.
anymore. Not anymore.
So the most common question that I get is what size jig should I get?
Okay.
And the second most common is what colors. And they do vary. They do. The sizes of the jigs are dependent upon the water flows. So use bull shoals, for example. My rule of thumb is, or the tailwaters bull shoals, my rule of thumb is if it's 0 to 2 units, then I'm primarily going to throw a 1/16 ounce jig on 2-pound line. If they're running 2 to 4 units, I'll throw a 3/32 for the most part. Unless I'm in a shoal and there's no wind, then I'll throw a 1/16 where it's shallower water. If I'm in a deeper hole and the wind's blowing, I may go to a 1/8. But if I'm 5 units or more, then I'm primarily going to be on a 1/8 ounce jig.
Okay.
Again, unless I'm in a shoal where it's shallower, then I'll throw a 3/32. So that's kind of the scale on the sizes. The colors are dependent on what the fish are doing. I let them tell me what they want, and obviously during the shad kill, you want to throw white.
That's right.
Some form of white. This past March I fished over there for, since 83. So 40 years this year. And I've never had a 3-day stretch like I did this past March.
Wow.
It was amazing. And it's, of all things, I put it on my YouTube channel. Again, it's funny. I've got a YouTube channel. I'm 53. I don't need a YouTube channel, but I had to put one together for the technique videos on the website.
Right.
And, but you can see it on the YouTube channel. I think it's called Fishing the White River Shad Kill. And I had a client over there, was doing some jig lessons, he and his son. They'd never trout fished before.
And they got a shad kill.
Oh, it was amazing.
Good for them.
I didn't know that it was going on when
Good
we got
for
over
them.
there.
Yeah.
Be spoiled.
Oh,
Yeah.
seriously, they'll never have that again.
And he said that because he said he wanted his son to catch some trout and he wanted a chance at catching a good one.
Yeah.
And so we go over there and we're fishing, and they had caught some fish, and I think Mark had caught a 19-inch rainbow, a healthy rainbow. And, we were catching some other 14, 15-inch rainbows, just fun. And I happened to glance down, something caught my eye, and I thought, my gosh, that looks like a shad. Oh, that looks like another. Okay, Mark, hang on just a second.
Yeah.
And let me get this jig. I tied on I call it the bleeding white shad kill. And his first cast, he hooks into a fish. And it was the biggest fish in the boat of 2023 for ours.
Way.
It was a 12-pound brown. Caught it on 2-pound line. Had never fished, but had never trout fished before. 12-pound brown on 2-pound line with this bleeding white shad kill jig.
Oh my goodness.
Took him 45 seconds to land the fish.
No way.
It happened to be coming by the boat, and I don't know that it realized that it was really hooked yet.
Yeah.
And we had him just barely out of the current, and he came by the boat, and I happened to get that net in front of him. We brought him up.
Oh,
It's a
my
good thing
Yeah.
you did, because it would have been a lot
it'd
longer
have
than
been a
45
lot
seconds.
longer than 45 seconds.
How long does a fight on a big fish like that normally take? If you're
Man,
hooking into a 12-pound
yeah.
brown, what do you expect?
Yeah, that actually happened not last summer, but the summer before. I got one that was 11 pounds, and I fought it for, I think it was 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Now he got one that was 11 and a half, but he hooked it out in the middle of the river, and it was
8 units.
8 units, 40.
Ooh, big
it was
water.
45, 50 minutes.
Is between, I've rethought it, probably 40 to 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I started at the imaginary line at Bull Shoals Dam. Okay, about 50 feet down below that, I hooked it. I landed that fish at the Wing Dam at State Park.
Oh my goodness.
Which is right at a mile.
yeah.
Yeah, right at a mile. And there were some guides coming up the river, and I was going like this.
Move out of
Stay
the
away,
way.
because my 2-pound line would be over there at the bank on the other side of the river.
Yeah.
I'd get him back up. Here he'd go back. I'd get him back up. About the 4th time, and I'd always said that I could take a picture of it and measure it and turn it loose and get a replica and all that. When that sucker hit the floor of that boat, I hit it with all 4s. I jumped on that fish because I figured he was going to flop out of the boat.
Now, and this was well before the trophy area
Oh,
was
yeah.
established at the
Yeah.
dam.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's on the wall at Southtown at Fayetteville.
Oh man.
I let him
I'll
use
have
it.
to
Your
check
fish
that
is
out.
there.
Yeah, I let him-
that's
I let him
cool.
use it.
Yeah, next time I'm in there, I'll have to go
It's a
over.
brown.
Yeah.
Real quick, explain to our listeners who may be unfamiliar with a shad kill what a shad kill is.
Yeah. So the reservoirs, the Bull Shoals Lake, for example, and the reason last year was so good was because it got so cold. You remember we had that really, really hard snap in October, and then it just kind of carried through the winter. The air temperature being, between 20 and 30 degrees for a long time. Well, that brings the lake temperature down. And as that lake temperature comes down, usually during the winter, it'll get low 40s, upper 30s. Well, last winter, it got into the mid 30s. Well, when that happens, you've got these balls of bait fish that are in that upper column or around the thermocline. Well, as it get close to that thermocline, that warmer water's underneath it. Yep. That cold water stuns those shad, and they're not dead. They're just stunned. They're basically paralyzed.
It's real lethargic. Yeah.
And they ball down to the bottom of the lake, and when they're kicking that big water on through the turbines of the dam, it's reaching out, grabbing some of these shad and pulling them through.
Yep.
So when they come through, they're alive, but a lot of them are dead, but just coming through there. But
Right.
there are some that are stunned, and they're just sitting there, just kind of flickering. And when they're swimming, when they're stunned, I don't know if you've ever seen it before.
Oh, yeah.
But they spiral down.
Yep.
And again, I mean, it's not just for our jig. Any jig is going to do this, whether it's ours or Jim's or whoever. A white jig or an imitation of something white is going to work. You can do it with a fly rod all day long when you're over there. But that's what the shad kill is. And people, since I posted that video, and people have asked me to do it before, but especially since I posted that video, I can't tell you how many people have contacted me to say, would you take me during the shad kill next year?
Yeah.
The difficulty is you have no idea.
You can't time it.
It's as random as it
Yeah.
can be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
I
like
just-
December through March or
Yeah.
early April.
Well,
is
it
a good
primarily,
guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now we have been over there Dad and I were there 3 or 4 years ago in September, and we're down at State Park, and we see fish busting the top of the water, which is very unusual. I mean, it's not unusual, but the way they were busting it, I mean, they're like bass feeding. Kentucky's coming up on the top, and I looked down, and sure enough, there's shad coming through. And I guess there was a ball of shad that had gotten close or whatever, and they just got sucked through, and it was a big ball because they'd made it all the way down there.
Yep.
So
there's one thing about the shad kill. If you're up there fishing and you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 come through, like on the surface, there may be 10 or 15 of them down underneath them on the bottom.
right.
Gotcha.
Those that are stunned or died, they're on the bottom. These up here are still trying to suck some air of some kind
Okay.
to come back to life.
Yeah.
So just because you only see 1 or 2, there's no sign they had a gob of them right down there.
Gotcha.
Well-
So you still keep fishing those jigs on the bottom,
Yeah.
or down close to the bottom.
And what was amazing about March, and I'll get to the rest of your question here in a second. But what was amazing about the 3-day stretch in March was that I've fished the shad kill before, and it's really good. But what made this one so good was that it was about every 45 minutes there would be a new burst of shad come through.
Oh, really?
And so as they would come through, the fish would get in a frenzy, and then they're gone. And so you throw the jig in there, and you've got 6, 7, 8 pound browns that are fighting over this thing. I don't know how many I caught.
Yeah.
I know I had 3 fish that were under 3 pounds. The rest of them were between 3 and 8 pounds. And it was 45 minutes. Here would come some more shad, and I would catch some then.
Yeah.
But then once I'd stop seeing the shad, they would go crazy, and it's every cast. And then I'd see more shad, and it'd slow down a little bit, and I'd catch some, but then they'd stop, and it was just over and over and over for 3 days.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing trip,
Golly.
amazing. Yeah, and it happened. It wasn't just in the trophy area; it was taking place. I floated down on Tuesday. I floated all the way down to State Park, and it was still very much taking place down there.
Man, I have not had the opportunity to fish a shad kill.
Yeah.
But gosh, I hope I get
Yeah.
to one day.
Yeah, we're gonna have to get a lot colder weather for it to happen this year.
Yeah.
Now next week may
Yeah,
help
probably
that.
this week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But as far as the other colors go, what determines what, the science says that when it's dark, you throw a dark color, and there's some validity to that.
Like overcast days.
Mhm.
Okay.
Or even night, you throw something dark. You know,
Okay.
when you're bass fishing, you throw black spinnerbaits or whatever. With trout fishing, you've got the crystal clear water. Now, what we do when you have the overcast days, you still have to let the fish tell you what they want. And what predicts that, I hadn't figured it out.
Yeah.
So you can look on the back of my boat, and you can tell if it's been tough fishing because I'll have 30 different colors back there.
Yeah. You just run through
just
it
running
all.
through it. But eventually we're going to find one. But the primary colors that we use are natural colors. So I've got one that's an Arkansas minnow. It's a sculpin with a tan belly on it, and it's got a sculpin head on it. And that one's year round. That one works on any, whether it's below beaver or Taneycomo, bull shoals, wherever, it's going to work, and it works all year, except maybe during the shad kill. Now we can still catch some, but not as well as on white. Black is one that is one of the primary colors. There are 4 that I'll have with me at all times. It's a black, whether the next is the Arkansas minnow, the bleeding shad kill, or a white shad kill, the white jig. And then the last one is either a little Andy or a peaches jig, which is a sculpin back with either a ginger belly, that's a little Andy, it's got an orange head on it, or a sculpin with a peach belly, and it's got a little bit of a burnt orange head on it.
Okay.
And those 4 colors are going to work
Yeah.
all year long.
Yeah.
We'll mix it up when the clouds do come out. We'll switch it up to a black jig, and black works really, really well, where the Arkansas minnow won't work as well. But then you have bright bluebird sky, no wind. We'll go to black, or we'll go to Arkansas minnow, something more natural. That's in all the running water. When we're fishing low water, when it's slick, there's no wind, anything like that, we'll throw a black jig. Which is
Just
crazy
simple
because
black
that
jig.
defies science.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it's the silhouette from the sun or whatever it is. We can see the jig, but we'll look. I mean, we'll fish cotter or wildcat or Norfolk, especially
Mm-hmm.
at low water, and just the numbers are crazy.
Yeah.
It's
See, I immediately would have assumed a peach olive or an olive tan
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
You're saying black on those
Mhm.
those conditions. Is
Now,
where it's at.
now what you're talking about definitely does work.
For sure.
It works, but I think because since we're sight fishing them, we can see the black jig, and so we can see the fish that are dancing around it. When I'm throwing the Arkansas minnow or the little Andy or peaches or whatever it
Mhm.
is, I can see the head of the little Andy, but I can't see the body of the jig, and I can kind of tell that there are fish coming, but
Mhm.
not near as well as the black jig.
Yeah.
So it's more of a preference for me.
Right.
The fish are still going to eat it, either one of them.
Mhm.
Now, if I was to throw a white jig out there in the bluebird sky, they're not going to have anything to do with it.
Really.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Man. So what about setup? Right. So we've got the colors down. Now, if you're going ultralight fishing and you want to do what you guys really specialize in,
Yeah.
what kind of setup do you run?
Yeah. So he Dad, when he started really doing this, he was set up on a 6-foot ultralight action rod and had reels that were 5-to-1s, spinning reels that were 5-to-1s, and they worked. They worked really well. That's because he was doing it. I started doing it,
Yeah.
and we did that for years.
I still do it.
Yeah, he
You
still
still do it?
he still does.
If it ain't broke, don't
That's
fix
right.
it.
And it works, I promise you. For me, what I've gone to now is I've gone to a 7-foot rod. It's a light action rod. Now, it honestly, it depends on the rod company, because light, ultralight are going to vary on different
Yeah.
rod companies. The ones I'm using right now are TFO rods. So the light action is the ultralight action on the TFO for me is not strong enough to work the jigs that I want, the way that I want to work them. So I use a light action, 7-foot light action. The reel that I'm using it's an Abu Garcia Revo X20. They're not being made anymore, and anytime that I see that some are for sale, I'm buying them because it's the
Okay.
best reel I've ever had. They're very durable, but like I said, they're not making them anymore.
Okay.
But
So what's
it's,
one that somebody could buy?
yeah. Whether it's a Fluger, Shimano, anything that's a 6-to-1, between a 5-to-1 or a 6-to-1 gear
Yeah.
ratio. If you get above a 6-to-1, then you're going to kind of take away from the speed retrieve of the jig. You want that jig to fall naturally. So what I found, what we found is that the 6-to-1 is probably going to be best for that.
And I use Fluger Presidents.
Mhm.
Okay. Gotcha.
That's all I use
Yeah.
anymore.
Okay.
And he catches the heck out of them.
Yeah.
So 6 to 7 foot light action or ultralight action rods, a 5 or 6-to-1 gear ratio on your spinning rods. We're throwing 2-pound line. It's 2-pound SOS Trout magnet line. Maxima, of course, works as well. We just found that the diameter of the SOS is just a tick bigger than the 2-pound Maxima line. And the color of it's invisible in the water. Now it's not fluorocarbon; it's still a mono. It's got a coat on it, but it is it's invisible to these fish.
And you don't think that the fluorocarbon makes any difference between that and this
It
and
can.
SOS?
It can.
Okay.
And David Taylor, who is a guide for Trout Magnet, he taught me something. David's an amazing angler. He taught me something. We were fishing one time, filming for what they're doing with Trout Magnet, and he was throwing braided line, 6-pound braid with a 2-pound fluoro leader. And as he was fishing, I was throwing my rod with the 2-pound line, 2-pound SOS, and we were below Beaver, and it was bluebird sky, crystal clear water. They're running one unit, so it's pretty slick where we were fishing. And we were both catching fish, but he was catching more fish than I was.
Mm.
And the reason was because he believes this, and I kind of became a believer myself, was because he was throwing that fluorocarbon leader.
Gotcha.
Just with the crystal clear water, the vision of these fish. I don't know that trout have better vision than bass do, but they're in clear water.
Yeah, the
So they're gonna
environment
be
they're
able,
in
yeah,
is so
it is,
see-through.
and it's amazing. So you need every advantage that you can get when the conditions are like that.
Right.
Anything other than that right there, I don't think there's a difference.
Yeah.
I really don't.
That
He
makes
also
sense.
likes the 6-pound braid because he can get the fish in quicker.
Mm.
For me, I'm learning to do that. Again, with this bass jig that we're developing, I've talked with a couple of guys. It's kind of beside the point, but I'm learning to fish with braid and a leader. I'm
Okay.
throwing 15-pound braid and 7-pound leader with a 1/8 ounce jig, a little bit bigger hook. And I'm learning that the fall of this is very, very similar because the diameter of the 7-pound fluorocarbon, it's a special fluorocarbon, is pretty close to a 4-pound fluoro. So with the 1/8 ounce jig, it's falling pretty naturally, and we're catching some really good bass on it as well.
Gotcha.
So,
But for the most part, I mean, you can get away with the SOS. It's monofilament.
Yeah.
You don't have to complicate your setup.
right,
2-pound tests.
Yep.
And that's what you're running.
yep. And you
that's what
can
I
you
do.
can
That's what you do.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Okay.
and you can throw 4-pound line, but what we found is the bigger diameters on the line are going to affect the action of the jig.
Yep.
So a 6-pound, you can throw 6-pound with a jig, but you get to 6-pound or above, and it's going to start taking away from the action of the jig.
Mm-hmm.
4-pound,
It's just too stiff.
yeah, it is. I mean, it's just cutting the water just
Mhm.
enough to kind of alter how it falls. You just want that jig to fall as naturally as it can.
Yeah.
Makes
And
sense.
4-pound does it a little bit. 2-pound doesn't do it at all. So that's why we primarily throw the 2-pound line.
So we've covered rod, we've
Mhm.
covered colors,
Mhm.
we've covered reel, line. Now, how do you actually fish it? Action wise, how are you retrieving this jig to the
Yeah.
boat?
Go ahead.
I want to
No,
hear
go
from
ahead.
Jerry.
Yeah, I do too.
Okay. So I cast out at about a 45-degree angle upstream, and I let that jig go down close to the bottom, and I have a little bit of slack in my line, and I pop it. Okay. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to jump that jig about 6 to 8 inches off the bottom. I mean, keeping it off the bottom to start with, but then jump it maybe 6 to 8 inches high and let it fall, and do that again, and just do that all the way back to the boat. Or unless you look down there, there's no fish there,
Yeah.
then you do it. So, and you just do that over and over and over.
Over and over and over.
Yeah. And then one day you're going to pop that thing and he's going to be on there. Now, how that happens, I don't know. I've studied that before, and I can see the fish in the water when I'm doing it. And it has the appearance of they're coming down and they're going with it. And then after about 3 pops, they can't stand it anymore. And that other pop, they've already got it in their mouth.
Mm.
JD told me one time he was catching fish like 2 or 3 to 1 to what I was. And I said, "What in the world are you doing different today?" He said, "Dad, I'm setting that hook before the fish ever gets in his mouth."
Yeah.
So he's getting all the slack out of that line, but you got to be good to do that. You got to have hand-eye coordination that I don't have anymore.
Yeah. And
You know,
you're
mine's gone.
watching it happen, right?
Yeah,
To be able to
that's-
do that,
Sight
you're
fishing.
seeing it.
Yeah,
There is nothing like sight
That's
fishing for
amazing.
trout. I don't care if that sucker's 4 inches long.
Yeah.
But he happens to be 4 foot long, and that's even better.
Yeah.
That's way
You know,
better.
Yeah.
So does sight fishing for him keep you out of some of the super deep runs, or how are you getting away with that?
for bigger fish, yeah. I mean, the bigger fish are going to be down to the bottom, so you can't see them.
Okay.
But
for the most part, you're looking for that water that's just deep enough where you can see that jig.
yeah,
doing what
like
it does.
you've fished at Cotter before.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I mean, it's got the flat rock bottom all right there, and at one unit, you're sitting in 2 feet of water. You can see everything.
Yeah, that
yeah,
makes
yeah.
sense.
And so the retrieve that he's talking about at Cotter at low water is very different, because you'll
Yeah.
cast it out there and you just kind of start swimming it, and you'll
Mhm.
pop it to get them attracted to it. But once they start coming to you, then you just kind of start swimming it.
Yeah.
And what he's talking about with why I was catching so many fish was I'm sitting there watching these fish come up behind it, and literally the moment I would see them open their mouth, I'd set the hook.
Yeah.
Because if you know anything about trout fishing, if a trout has something in his mouth that he's not real sure about,
He's spitting it.
it's that quick.
Yeah.
And so I'm beating him to it is what I'm doing. And then the running water retrieve is, what he's talking about, a 45-degree angle upstream, the boat's floating. And so you've got a natural flow of that jig as it's kind of passing the boat. As it comes by you, that jig is getting down.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I explain it to, people that I'm giving lessons to is I always want the jig working in the lower third of the water column. Now, some of the stocked fish, they're going to be in that mid column. Some of them are going to be up, but the bigger fish, for the most part, are going to
Stay
be,
low.
especially browns, they're going to be down
Right.
close to the bottom. And so we let it get down into that lower third. And when we pop it, we don't want it to come out of that lower third. We want to work it
Yep.
entirely in that lower third.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So
Season to season, I mean, right now we're looking at January. It's ice cold outside. Do you vary your approach, in the winter versus spring, summer? Is it pretty much same deal all year long?
yeah, it's the same.
I don't ever change.
Yeah, it is. It's the same.
That
all
kind of
year
is
long.
nice. Is like you don't have to
Yeah.
figure out a new retrieve, or
Right.
do you change pace at all? How fast or slow you retrieve or anything?
Not because of the water, because of me.
Right.
I'm
'Cause you're
I'm
getting
sitting-
cold?
Well, no, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, these fish have got to be lethargic
Yeah.
because this water's so cold.
Right.
And then I get to thinking, okay, I got to slow this down. And I might, instead of popping it like that, I might, pop it halfway
Yeah.
Right.
or something. And I think it just gives that fish more time to react, because the water down there is definitely colder,
Sure.
because it's coming out from under that lake that's got the cold water in it.
Right.
So
you're kind of still even, you might experiment with it. If they're not hitting the
yeah.
slow bite, you're going to go a
Yes.
little bit quicker.
Yeah.
And speed
Yes.
it up.
And that swim he's talking about, if I get in shallow water, even if it's running water, and I see fish out there, I'll just start doing this and barely retrieving that thing.
Yeah, just
And that
little
jig-
pops.
No, not even little pops, just swimming.
Okay.
That jig will do this through the
It
water.
just sits there and fluctuates like
And
that.
we learned that on Taneycoma one day. We see fish over here and they're surfacing everywhere. We can't catch any of them. I threw a jig out there and I said, JD, let's just try this. And I started and you got a bass fish.
Yeah.
Because he's going to bite it like a bass.
Right.
So you got to be ready to give it a little pop.
Yeah.
To set the hook. That other way, he's going to set it himself
Right.
generally.
Right.
Gotcha.
There are a lot of time. I say a lot when the steady action retrieve that he was talking about just a second ago, where you cast out and pop and let it fall and pop. That's the standard retrieve.
Yep.
Anybody can do that.
Yep.
The trick is making sure that you're letting that jig fall on a slack line, but you also want to be what I call connected to the jig as it's falling. You're letting that rod go down with it, so that when you pop it, you're actually moving the jig, so that because line may be on top of the water. But if that retrieve's not working, then one thing that I'll do, and he was talking about this, is that in that lower third of the water column, I'll swim it like he's talking about. If they're not eating that standard retrieve, then I'll cast it out. I'll let it get down to the bottom, pop it one time, and then I'll sit there and swim it. And then I'll pop it, and then I'll swim it. Just mix it up and let the fish tell us, what they want that day.
Yeah.
And it does it. I mean, I never really considered that cold fronts or barometric pressure or anything would affect trout like they do bass, but they do. I didn't realize that until probably 3 or 4 years ago, and that's when I had to start really mixing up that retrieve, because they would want it slower. They were more lethargic because they're feeling that pressure on them. They're not really wanting to eat.
Yeah.
So they just want something a little bit slower. And when we made that adjustment, the numbers continued to be what they were.
Yep.
So
I find that sometimes when you're in a boat, you have a little bit of advantage over the guy that's just wading fly fishing, because I'm sitting here and I'm watching the fish to see if I can see any fish, but I'm watching the contour of the bottom. And so I'll come down through here and I'll come down this run and I'll see the contour of the bottom. I'll go back. Now I know what that bottom looks like.
That's right.
So okay, right here it got deeper. So I'm going to let that jig on down a little bit, because you got to get close to the bottom.
Yeah, for sure.
So you just get to figure out what the contour of the bottom is and then stay close to it.
I love when you're in a boat and you're teaching somebody who doesn't really know how to fish.
Yeah.
It's like, you see that shelf where the light color changes to the dark color. It's like,
Right.
put it right there.
Right.
That's it.
The
That's
deal.
it.
right.
Then they're catching fish. But
Yes.
I primarily fly fish with the jig. And you're talking about the action. I'm not an ultralight guy. Well, I grew up on it, but I was never good at it for trout. I think
Right.
probably because I got into fly fishing for trout. But I'm amazed how many fish I'll catch on the jig when it's on a floating line, but down towards the bottom, and I mend my fly line to keep the dead drift
Right.
in the right spot.
Right.
And that little mend makes a little action.
Just
and
a,
the fish
just a
hits
little
it.
bit right there.
So I got to where if I'm jig fishing on the fly rod, which the purists may hate, but whatever.
Is it jig?
I'm not a purist.
Is it a fly or is it a lure? How do we?
He's jig slinging.
He's jig slinging.
Something.
Slinging the jig.
Where would that fall? I'm kind of curious now. Just as
It's
a side
jig.
note, it's a jig. It's not a fly and it's not a lure.
It's a jig.
Yeah, it's its own category.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's a jig.
All right.
So I'm going to say it's totally appropriate on a fly rod.
Yeah.
Oh,
cast a
absolutely.
jig.
I mean, if
Yeah.
you're catching fish,
Um,
I don't care.
Yeah.
But I got to where I'll purposely kind of do what y'all are describing
Right.
on the fly rod,
Right.
which is more mends or even a little bit of popping action or anything. And it's,
Yep.
it works.
Just gives it a little bit more action.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple. I never fly fish. I can't slow down long enough to do that. So anyway, I've got a couple of friends that have taken up fly fishing, got away from jig fishing a little bit. But now what they're doing is they're taking a 16th ounce, 8 units, hard to fly fish, but they take a 16th ounce jig and they run it down somehow on that line. And then about a foot below that, they'll put a midge. Okay. Whatever the color might be, they'll put that midge on there. And one of my friends says he's seen it before, and I think I saw it, but I couldn't really distinguish in the water what was going on. The fish will come down, and he'll be coming down on that jig, and he catches, I guess that midge catches his eye, and he'll go,
Yeah.
and
Hit that one.
He'll nail that midge.
Yeah.
And 90% of the fish hit that midge instead of that jig. But now they're calling, and other fly fishermen are doing this now. They're calling that jig the attractant.
I've heard this.
They
before.
don't want to say I'm fishing with a jig.
Yeah.
I'm fishing with an
This is my
attractant.
my attractor
Yeah.
fly. Yeah.
Right.
I've seen people do that with bright colored eggs, or Y2Ks is another popular attractor fly where it's bigger, it's enough to catch the attention, and then they come up to it, they check it out, and they're like, oh, there's something I know.
Right.
The midge is
Yeah.
much smaller, easy to eat, and they go
Right.
for it.
I've actually caught fish on these jigs many years ago. When here again, we're just learning how to do this. I was actually dead drifting some of these jigs and just making sure I had them up off the bottom a little bit. And I've caught some really nice fish.
Just
Doing
dead
that,
drifting 'em.
Yeah.
just throw those suckers out there and let them get down close to the bottom, and just move them just enough to keep them off the bottom like a natural
Right.
flow.
Yeah.
And those bigger trout will just nail those things.
Yeah.
And when you said egg pattern, I get off the jigs every once in a while, go play. JD won't do that, but I got to do it if I'm not catching fish. I
But
gotta try
he'll wear
something.
me out when he does it.
Yeah, but I'll just set up a little drift wig with a little weight on it, and I use a Y2K or something like that.
Yeah.
And just throw it out there, and just like if I was drifting a worm or whatever, and let that weight hit the bottom, and that Y2K or the egg pattern is floating up.
Yeah.
And I've seen them, man, they just come up and slurp that sucker.
Yeah.
That's what it is, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
We can't give away all our secrets, but I dead drift a jig on a fly rod more than I'm willing to admit on a podcast. It happens a lot.
Yeah.
There it is.
There we go.
And I know Kyle does it too
I do
because
too. Here
we
we
share
go.
a boat.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So I divulged one of your secrets.
There you go. We're sold out now.
Yeah.
Man, it's crazy to me that I mean, obviously, it's a very versatile fly, lure, jig,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call it.
Jig.
Jig.
Well,
Thank you.
I'm describing a jig. I can't say it's a very versatile jig.
It's a jig show.
Yeah, there you go. It's very versatile, right? And I think that's probably, and you tell me, part of the reason, or a large part of the reason why it's been so successful on the White River. It's been around since 1950.
Yep.
And it still continues today to be one of the most effective ways to catch trout. And so it's amazing to me just that it's lasted and it has the history that it has. And I'm glad that people like you are still making them so that people like me and anyone else who fishes with them can go out and have some success and, make some memories, tell some stories with family and friends. It's a lot of fun. We love fishing.
Right.
I know the four of us do. So it's cool to get to the chance to, have other people get to share in that experience.
Yeah.
Can I share one more little story before
Go for it, Jerry.
Okay, so this year was my 81st birthday. Okay,
That's a good story.
October the 18th. So I told my wife, I said, I'm going to the White River today by myself. I want to prove to myself that I can still get over there, get home safely, and do some fishing. So I thought, and she says, well, whatever you need to do. My neurologist told my wife the other day that the day he stops fishing, he's done. At my age, and what she's referring to is I've been very active all my life, and that's what she told my wife. He's been active all of his life. The day he stops, he's done.
Yeah.
So I ain't planning on stopping.
So keep him fishing.
But that gave me a free ticket to tell my wife, hey, you remember what she said? So anyway,
go.
I told Sue that I want to go over to White River, and I'd made up my mind on the way over there. If they weren't running water or if fishing wasn't any good, I was going to back that boat in the water, cast one time, load it up, and come home. I went fishing on my birthday, my 81st birthday.
Yeah.
So I get over there, and they were running, 4 or 5 units, perfect water, okay? So I went up, and I fished for about 4 or 5 hours. It was in the evening, and I'd caught, 2 trout. I mean, it was, for numbers of trout, it was terrible, but I can go up there, and I know where to pick out those little fish, but I'm not worried about them little ones. I'm trying to get one of those others. So I get this hit, okay? And about, 15, 20 minutes later, it weighed between 8 and 9 pounds, 28 and a half inch brown.
No way.
What a birthday present.
81st birthday.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Let me add
Go
to
ahead
it.
and tell him when he saw it. Here's the thing. There wasn't anybody around that I could get to take my picture. Everybody was fishing, so I didn't bother them. So I laid it in the net, And you got to think about how big our net is, and then you can see the 28.5 inches without any problem. You know, I originally said 28.
Mm-hmm.
I got to looking at that picture, another one of those pictures, and I didn't have it against the line on the front of the boat.
Right.
So, you know, it was 28.5 inches.
Yeah.
Now go ahead.
I get a call that night. It was October 18th. That's his birthday. Isn't that right?
Yep.
Yeah. October 18th, I get a call that evening, and it's him, and I knew he'd been fishing, so he'll always call me, or I'll call him, tell him about the day.
Yeah.
And so I answered it, and all I hear is singing. He's singing happy birthday to himself. And I said, and I knew what it meant. I asked him, I said, what'd you get?
Yeah.
And he started telling me about it. And I guess he pulled over in Harrison or whatever and texted me the pictures and the video of this fish, and just beautiful brown trout that he got on his 81st birthday.
That is awesome.
While he's over there by himself.
Yeah.
Now, for a son, that's something to aspire toward.
Yeah.
As his son, proud moment for my dad.
Yeah.
And just amazing. Something I won't forget.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Is that your personal best?
No.
Biggest? It's
No.
not?
I've got 11.5 inch brown.
11.5 pounds.
I'm 11.5 pound brown. It was 31.5 inches.
Oh, man.
That's that big one I caught. And as another part of that story is, I got him up to that boat about 4 times. He turned around and go back. So finally, on about that last run up, I thought, I've got to get this fish in this net. He's gonna pull that line apart. I mean, just pull it apart.
Yeah.
You can take 2 pound line and just do that, and you can pull it apart.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I knew that was fixing to happen. So I stuck that net on him. He swam into that net. I'm starting to get him out of the water, and I realized it was an old rent boat. 31.5 inch fish don't fit in a 24-inch net.
No.
So I just let him slide over into the boat, and that's when I hit him because he was alive and well.
Yeah.
So anyway, this fish, I put him in the net and laying down, and the net, I measured the net the other day. I just want to make sure my story's right. The net's 24 inches. Down on this side of it, you can see about that much of his head. And on the other end of that net, you can see about that much of his tail.
So he's way bigger than the net.
But then JD, when I talked to JD says, you know, my friend Robert and I were fishing the other day. We weighed one that was 11 pounds, and it was 28.5 inches. He said, Dad, your fish is not that big, but it's more than any other, 8 or 9 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, I'm satisfied with 8 or 9 pounds.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good birthday
Right.
present.
I'll take that all day long.
Yeah, no doubt.
Man.
The number of trophies that he's got has been, you can't count them on 2 hands.
My personal
That's awesome.
best on the White River of a brown was 10.25.
Rainbow.
Rainbow. Oh, yeah, rainbow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
10.25.
That's a big old rainbow.
Yeah. And he was about 28.5
I
too.
didn't know they got that big.
Golly.
That was mostly browns that got that big.
Yeah.
That's insane.
That is wild.
Yeah, that was a crazy day because JD had seen that fish 2 days before. Or the day,
It was the day before.
he'd seen that
He
fish.
took a swipe at my jig.
Yeah.
I told him where it was. We met, and I left the river, dropped the boat off to him. He was coming over from Fayetteville. He picked it up in Harrison. And that day, it was the next day he goes fishing. And I told him exactly where it was, and he caught that fish. the next
He's like,
day.
I'll go catch it.
He did.
Yep.
Thanks for scouting it out for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
son. Good boy.
It's teamwork.
I want to tell you guys thank you because as I've been sitting here listening to JD and you guys ask your question, talking about Ellen again, my head has just been spinning with 40-something years of fishing stories.
Yeah.
Of on the river, taking young men, taking boys from boys' ranches fishing, organizing groups with young men. And these are people that are in foster care. When we first started doing those boys' ranch trips, it was inner city St. Louis, inner city Kansas City, and inner city Houston. We had the bad boys. Now it's young foster that DHS is involved, trying to keep those kids in the same family. And the DHS and the boys' ranch, they're doing it's a children's ranch now. They're doing a wonderful job. Last year was our 30th year of doing that.
Wow. That's awesome.
Taking those kids.
Man, that is
We
cool.
do them a fish fry. I mean, we do the whole thing.
That's awesome.
Do the whole thing.
There's no better way than just to get kids out and fishing. And
That's right.
I mean, that's memories that they're going to have forever. And,
Yeah.
and, you know, you're going to remember those too, taking
You
them
bet.
out there. So
Oh, yeah.
it's,
Right.
that's good to hear.
Yeah.
But guys, thank you so much for
Yeah.
coming on the show and just, you know, taking the time to talk with us. I'm happy to see that D2 Jigs is taking off and that
Yeah,
you
thank
guys
you.
are getting your product out there.
Thank you.
We're going to have to go fishing sometime, JD. I know
I'd love to.
we haven't done it yet, but we're going to have to get out there with you. And
Yeah.
I want to see this ultralight action in person.
Yeah, we need to set it up.
Yeah.
It's a matter of figuring out when we can do it, but we do. We need to do that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. We appreciate
Yeah,
it.
thank you.